Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and I wanted to share something new with you all that looks like it was specifically designed for people like myself, people who like to stockpile ammunition and store it up properly so it will last for a very long time. And that's ammo in a soup can from Mags & Co. Now this ammo is already sealed up in a durable container, and it has an oxygen absorber as well, so it's ready to go for the long term, and you don't have to do any extra work. And in all honesty, the prices are very similar to what you would buy anyway, especially once you start buying in bulk. So what we're going to do is open these up. I'm going to show you some of the interesting features that these ammo soup cans actually provide, and we're going to go test it out on the range in the sense of velocities and running it through the chronograph to make sure it lines up with other styles of ammunition in a similar range to ensure that it's, hitting proper terminal ballistics and everything else you'd expect from high quality manufactured ammunition. So let's dive right into it and open up a soup can of ammo. All right, we're gonna start with the 9mm 115 grain full metal jacket ammunition. And this is a 29-ounce steel can that's tin plated. So it's pretty strong, a little bit heavy. And then we have the plastic cap here, which exposes the pop top. So this is nice and easy to open. You don't need tools or anything. We're gonna pop that. As you can see, it was fully sealed, right? And then we have our oxygen absorber right here in the top. So everything's sealed up properly and would last a very long time on the shelf. Now, you can see plenty of ammunition. Let's pull one of the rounds out. Okay, pretty standard issue when it comes to being 9mm ammo, right? Well, I'm trying to get the camera to focus. It's really not working with me right now. There we go. So they're using Norma cases, which is good to go, and 115 grain full metal jackets. So we'll test these on the chronograph and see how it works. But before we do that, put the lid back on. We're gonna take this label off. Now, I gotta figure out exactly where to take it off. It looks like we have this little spot right here. Okay, so I'm gonna pull this down. There's the peel here. That would have been easier to show if I would have been reading properly. But now it's got a little bit more of a food look to it, and this is to make it a little bit more discreet when it's stored on your shelf. So now this is just called pinto beans, high quality, watertight, long-term storage, right? And if you look on the back, the nutritional facts start telling you about how it's, brass cases, 115 grain bullet weights, full metal jackets, caliber 9mm Luger, manufacturers ZSRs. Hold up, post-production Magic Prepper here. When I read ZSR on this label, I got a little confused because to my knowledge, that's low quality Turkish ammo and these cans say made in the USA all over them. But I've noticed that the other cans say Norma and that the ammunition inside of this can has Norma head stamps. So I reached out to Mags & Co to figure out what was going on there. And apparently this label was just a misprint and there are some of these out there, but all the ammunition inside is in fact Norma and is in fact made in the USA. But I just wanted to clarify that because I wouldn't recommend people stock up on ZSR ammunition, but Norma ammunition has been perfectly fine for me. So just wanted to clarify, back to the video. Like, we actually have some information here, but it looks like food to the untrained eye unless they started actually reading this label. So I think that's kind of cool just to give you something and to compare them. You can see, that's what it usually looks like. And then this is what it looks like if you take off the outside label. So I think that's pretty cool actually. And it's just kind of a fun additional feature, and it definitely has that idea of OPSEC in mind. So I can appreciate that. But the main thing we got to do now is take this out to the range, see how the ammo performs. We're going to test out the 115 grain, we're going to test out the 124 grain, and we're going to test out the 5.56 NATO in order to see if we're getting the correct velocities. And these velocities are likely, published with a 20-inch barrel or something of that nature. We're going to use a 16-inch barrel. We're just going to compare it to standard M855 to see what we get. We're going to compare this one to 9mm NATO because it's the only 124 grain rounds I have right now. So they might be a little hotter, but 1181 is actually pretty close to NATO velocities, so that should be fine. And then of course I've got Fiocchi 115 grain range training ammo to test that against the pinto beans here. So let's go take it to the range and see how it goes. All right, now full disclosure, Mags & Co sent this ammunition free of charge to the channel for testing and evaluation, and if it performs properly, I'll share a discount code with you at the end of the video. Now, this is the Pinto Beans 9mm 115 grain full metal jackets. We're gonna test this on the chronograph to get some velocities, and we'll compare it to Fiocchi 115 grain full metal jackets just to make sure that it's performing properly. And we'll do the same with the 124 grain 9mm and the 62 grain 5.56 NATO. So let's get this loaded up. And our test pistol today is going to be my Glock 45, which has just a little over a 4-inch barrel. And we'll use the same firearm for all of the 9mm testing today. Okay. And the chronograph's already ready to go. So let's see how we do. Okay, 1,097. 1,085. 1,102. 1,083. 1,092. Okay, put a little divot where I have my knee at so we can keep that consistent. So let's get the real numbers there. Write it down in our handy dandy notebook. And okay, the average was 1,091 feet per second. Standard deviation was 7. Now we're gonna load up 115 grain Fiocchi and do the same test. I'm using all kinds of different magazines today just to make sure I don't mix anything up. But this is the 115 grain Fiocchi 9mm. Same pistol. Let's give it a shot. Okay. $1,078. This is why you don't use P-mags, my friends. $1,070. $1,102. 1,077. 1,061. So, there's a reason why that particular magazine is relegated to range use only. And let's see what our average there was. 1,077 was the average. This is for the Fiocchi. And the average standard deviation was 13. So, at least in this 5-round test, the Mags & Co ammunition performed better with a higher velocity and a smaller standard deviation. Not bad. So, we're gonna move on to the 124 grain test now. All right, so here we have the 124 grain full metal jacket 9mm, or known as whole corn. We're gonna test that out in the same fashion, and we're gonna compare it to Winchester white box 9mm NATO. It's the only 124 grain full metal jacket ammo I have right now. It might be a little hotter because of those NATO pressures, but we'll see. So let's test this out. Same fashion as before. Same gun as before, Glock 45. All right. Load in 5 rounds. Okay. See how it does. Same spot again. Seems to be working well. $1,002. $1,022. $1,020. $1,016. $1,037. So, I think it's pretty safe to say that these are not running at 9mm NATO velocities. Although, the advertised velocity on this particular can is 1,181 feet per second. So I don't know if that was the intended NATO velocity they were hoping for, but that's the same velocity that was listed on the 115 grain as well. So I don't think those velocities are actually accurate, of course, unless they're coming out of much longer barrels. which might be the case. So let's see how we did. Gotta grab the notebook, of course. Okay, the average was 1,019 feet per second. And the standard deviation was 11. Okay, so go ahead and reset the chronograph. And now we'll test it against Winchester 9mm NATO, which I know is going to outperform it just based on those numbers, but we'll see how it goes either way. $11.57. 11.72. 11.33. 11.29. 11.65. All right. So as you can see, that's actually 9mm NATO. Clearly at higher velocities and running higher pressures, but we'll take the averages and everything anyway. Average on that was 11.51 feet per second. And the standard deviation was 17. So it had the worst standard deviation so far, but here we are. Okay, so like I said, it's clearly not 9mm NATO, it's just 124 grain full metal jacket. The velocities written on the cans are not up to par for what is actually coming out, but especially with the 115 grain full metal jacket 9mm, it's performing, well, slightly better than its competitor in Fiocchi, so it's in line with what we would expect from factory loaded 9mm. It's just not hitting the velocities that are advertised on the can, and it's definitely not 9mm NATO. So let's go ahead and test out the 5.56 NATO to see what those results look like. All right, so here's the 62 grain full metal jacket 5.56 NATO, also known as baked beans, and these are advertised to be running at 3,020 feet per second. So I'm not exactly sure how accurate that'll be out of a 16-inch barrel AR, which is what we're going to be using for this test, but we're going to test it against standard M855 just to verify if the velocities are within reason of each other. So we'll go ahead and load these up. And just like before, we're going to do a 5-round test. And the rifle we're using for this test is going to be my BCM Recce 16 with a Huxworks Ventum 7.62 suppressor on it. And it'll be the same rifle for both tests, and I guess that's about as good as I can do with it, all right? So, it's gonna verify I'm not gonna blast my chronograph here. You know, we do need to reset the chronograph. There we go, much better. Okay. $3,003. Not bad from a 16-inch barrel. $2,955. 3,006. 2,992. 2,967. Okay. Well, not too bad actually. Let's see what we have here. All right, so our average there was 2,984. And standard deviation was 20 feet per second, all right? Okay, so the average on that being 2,984, is really not bad at all from a 16-inch barrel when the advertised velocity was 3,020. So, not too bad. Now, let's test it against M855. This is what I have right here. As you can see, green tips and all. So, same deal as before. $2,938. 2,894. 2,925. 2,934. 2,896. Okay. All right. Get the averages on that. So the average is 2,917. And the standard deviation is 18. So the 556 NATO had a slightly worse standard deviation of 20, but better velocity overall at 2,984 feet per second for the Mags & Co. ammunition. Whereas the M855 green tip 62 grain, which was from IMI Systems, by the way, was 2,917 feet per second with a standard deviation of 18. So a little bit more consistent, but with an almost 70 foot per second drop in velocity. So, what did we learn? Well, the 556 NATO from Mags & Co. had an average velocity of 2,984 feet per second with a standard deviation of 20 feet per second out of a 16-inch barrel. And M855 from IMI Systems had 2,917 feet per second with a standard deviation of 18 feet per second. So, of course, is it performing properly or within the standard ranges? Yes, it is. For the 115 grain full metal jacket 9mm, the Mags & Co. ammo was at 1,091 feet per second with a standard deviation of 7. Whereas Fiocchi 115 grain full metal jacket 9mm was at 1,077 feet per second with a standard deviation of 13. So the Mags & Co. outperformed the Fiocchi when it comes to velocity and consistency, and also outperformed the 556 M855 when it comes to velocity alone, and was very close in consistency. Now the 124 grain 9mm full metal jacket came out at 1,019 feet per second with a standard deviation of 7. Now it's advertised much faster. So that's the one that underperformed, at least according to what it was advertised at in the sense of velocity, and in comparison to 9mm NATO, which this is not 9mm NATO, but it's still something for you to consider. Whereas 9mm NATO, 124 grain full metal jacket, Winchester white box, was 1,151 feet per second on average and had a standard deviation of 17. So it was less consistent, but much faster. So the velocity test shows that the ammunition is within spec and within reason in comparison to other ammunition types. And I'm sure if I had a standard 9mm load and 124 grain full metal jacket, it would have performed very similarly. The only thing I have to say about that is that the velocities on the 9mm both state 1,181 feet per second, which is obviously not accurate unless they were shooting it out of like a 16-inch barrel or a 9-inch barrel or who knows what else. But regardless, the velocity on the 556 advertising 3,020 and then giving us an average of 2,984 is actually pretty on point, especially out of a 16-inch barrel. So the only thing left to do is, first off, just shoot a bunch of it just to make sure it cycles and runs properly. And then I'll let you know if it's running well, what the discount code is, and you can decide if this is something that would be right for you. All right, so I've got a couple mags loaded up in the Glock with the Mags & Co. 115 grain full metal jacket. We're just gonna run it just to see if everything cycles properly and works the way it's supposed to. So far it's been fine, but it's always good to kind of push it a little bit to ensure that everything is going to work the way it's supposed to. So go ahead and just shoot some rounds out here. Okay. Okay. That was me pushing down on the slide release, but otherwise everything cycled the way it's supposed to. So, which doesn't really happen too often, but I know for a fact it happened that time. Good to go in that regard, 2 full mags. Everything ran and cycled the way it's supposed to. I mean, I'm gonna shoot more of this stuff, but in general, it seems to be working the way that it's intended to, and it also hits the velocities that we would hope it would hit. So let's run some through the 5.56 now too, just to verify. All right, so here we got a full mag of the 5.56 62 grain full metal jackets from Mags & Co. And we're just gonna run it relatively quickly, maybe with like a series of build drills just to see if everything is gonna run. And of course, I'm not gonna use a timer because I just didn't grab it. So everything seems to cycle. Now this is a BCM Recce 16 with a mid-length gas system. I've got an H2 buffer in here right now with a standard carbine style buffer spring. So we also have a flow through Huxworks Ventum 762. Just in case any of those details matter to you, or if you were looking at the ejection pattern and had any questions about it, well, that should explain some things. So let's talk about everything that we learned, and I'll give you a little bit more information and then we'll wrap it up. All right, so we've learned quite a bit. And of course, if you want to support the channel without spending a dime, hit the subscribe button down below because it really does help move things forward. Now, this ammo seems to perform to factory loaded ammunition standards, which is exactly what I was looking for. However, if I had to suggest it, I would personally stick to the Pinto Bean 115 grain full metal jacket 9mm or the Baked Bean 62 grain full metal jacket 5.56 NATO. The Whole Corn 124 grain full metal jacket 9mm didn't meet its advertised velocity, and neither did the Pinto Bean, but it also didn't compete against standard 9mm NATO loadings, so I don't personally have a place for it. But it does cost the exact same as the 115 grain full metal jacket 9mm, which means it might work for you depending on personal preference. And that leads us into affordability. This ammunition is relatively affordable considering it comes in a durable container that's already sealed and ready for long-term storage. The 5.56 NATO runs 50 to 55 cents per round, depending on whether or not you buy it in bulk. And the 9mm is a little bit more expensive. It runs 32 to 35 cents per round. Yes, it comes in a sealed container, and yes, it's ready for long-term storage, but that is a little pricier than what you can usually find from other outlets, which leads me into the discount code. Now, I am going to share it because the ammunition did perform to velocity specs that I was looking for while also cycling in my firearms, at least as of now. So I don't necessarily have any issues with it, and that discount code is MagicPrepper10, one word, which gets you 10% off of your order, which then lowers the overall cost of the ammo and the price per round. So Mags & Co., I think they're very forward-thinking in providing this product. I think they understand there's a lot of people out there that want to store ammo for long-term purposes and maybe don't want to do all the additional steps. So they just want to pull it out of the box, set it on the shelf, and be done. And you can do that with this particular ammunition. Not to mention they have the interesting food labels and stuff as part of the feature set, which I find to be fun and also unique. So that's also very cool. And I'd love to hear your feedback down below in the comments about this particular product and whether or not it was something you'd be interested in. Of course, any feedback you have for me is always welcome as well. Anything else you need from me, you can go to magicprepper.com. There you can find a lot of ways to network, other information, and you can find my personal product, which is currently for sale. Besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.